Welcome to the War Insider YouTube channel. You can support our Ukrainian team by subscribing. Last year, the rise of Prigozhin dominated headlines as Putin's former chef teamed up with Kadyrov to use the propaganda machine to their advantage. Prigozhin enlisted 50,000 convicts and insulted army generals while government officials feared losing their hold on power. However, this year's main storyline centers around Prigozhin's obvious downfall as he replaces his bravado with whining and cusses with groveling. Although this is widely known, it's important to delve deeper into the situation. In the corporate world, conflicts can arise due to conflicting departments with different goals and incentives. For instance, a supermarket chain's development department might aim to open as many stores as possible, regardless of their performance, while the sales department turns profits from those stores. These departments cannot be partners. Similarly, Russia's Ministry of Defense and the Wagner Group are in a state of premeditated confrontation as there is a constant battle for resources between them. The Russian army is supposed to provide Prigozhin's soldiers with ammunition, vehicles, logistics, and air support, which strains their bureaucracy since such a transfer of equipment to private hands is illegal. Money is a major issue as it's being siphoned to shady civilians rather than going to generals and army bureaucrats, who were the intended beneficiaries. Moreover, the Wagner Group openly competes with and mocks the army, and their media empire uses state propaganda to attack the military. Prigozhin can expose the army's dirty laundry and destroy any general, making him a harmful leech on the army structure. He never shares his victories and always blames the army for his failures. Despite this, he's Putin's favorite and propaganda's darling. The class differences cannot be ignored when discussing Prigozhin's perceived invincibility. Although he is a restaurateur from St. Petersburg whose culinary skills brought him close to Putin, Russia's top brass sees him as a mere waiter, kitchen staff, and hustler. Those he is challenging are accustomed to dealing with billions of offshore accounts, selling banks and oil fields. To them, Prigozhin is insignificant, someone they use to extort rather than take orders from. However, Prigozhin has managed to achieve something that even Putin's army, which has received $1 trillion in funding over the last 15 years, could not. By preventing the frontline forces from collapsing, he has bought Putin time and earned his favor. General Surovikin's attempts to gain territory in Ukraine with hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars worth of missiles and shells have been unsuccessful. The decision to hold referendums with new state borders running through the trenches has not impressed anyone. Nonetheless, until recently, Prigozhin's ability to keep the frontline forces afloat was his saving grace. Prigozhin's power was once unbreakable, with his gang of prisoners controlling a single area of the Ukrainian front line so well that the Ukrainian army couldn't even consider launching a counteroffensive elsewhere. But this only lasted as long as he remained useful. Eventually, the army had to face the fact that a lowly convict held more power than any general. It's unclear exactly what led to Prigozhin's fall from grace. Perhaps he promised to capture Bakhmut before the new year to bolster Putin's address to the nation, but ultimately, the Wagner PMC began 2023 in very different circumstances. The relationship between the Wagner Group and the Ministry of Defense changed drastically, with state propaganda and Ramzan Kadyrov no longer praising Prigozhin. The devastating blow to Prigozhin was that he could no longer recruit convicts. That was now the mod's job. And they didn't bother to persuade anyone, just came and picked who they wanted. The bigwigs in large offices figured out what made Prigozhin special, and it wasn't his invincible warriors or his political skills. It was his access to a readily available source of manpower. Prigozhin was like an overnight millionaire who stumbled upon a valuable resource, only to be driven out of business by local oligarchs when they found out about it. A valuable resource. What happens when ordinary citizens who were expecting a fishing trip or summer camp end up on the front lines as mobilized recruits? Many find themselves in dire situations, lacking warm clothes, working weapons, proper food, protective gear, and basic amenities. They face commanders who send them on suicide missions and rampant corruption, incompetence, and lawlessness within the Russian army. Outraged, They make appeals to the government, and their families speak out publicly. Even state-run media, typically loyal to the regime, must admit the army is incompetent and ill-prepared. The mobilization drive draws public attention, and the backlash affects not only the army, but also Putin himself. Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, has suppressed such scrutiny for the past decade. However, mobilized citizens are a difficult group to exploit or abuse. They are difficult to steal from, and when they are killed, like in Makiivka, it causes scandal and demands for retaliation. The military views them as rule-breaking civilians causing a ruckus, but convicts are seen as a valuable resource for the Ministry of Defense. Convicts are seen as nothing more than walking ATMs. The process is simple. Putin signs clemency orders in advance, with the number of convicts to be released added later. It remains unclear how many of these convicts were sent to fight in Bakhmut and how many managed to buy their freedom and flee to Abu Dhabi. Only historians will be able to uncover the truth after everything is said and done. Now that the Ministry of Defense has gotten involved, the situation has become even more pronounced. Prigozhin only recruited convicts who volunteered. No one was forced to go. The Ministry of Defense has modified its approach, accepting bribes not just from those seeking freedom, but also from those who wish to finish their prison sentence without risking their lives on the battlefield. Convicts have no voice and no one to hear their complaints of corruption. The only time we get to hear their stories is when they are captured as prisoners of war. Even then, it is impossible to know how much of the essential equipment actually made it to them, as opposed to being sold for personal gain. There is no way to conduct an internal or public investigation to uncover these misdeeds. If any problems arise, they can be covered up easily, and any evidence buried deep enough to avoid detection. In the event of a disaster, there is no need to talk to relatives or offer compensation. The bodies can simply be bulldozed into mass graves, as Prigozhin did. The Wagner Group, in comparison to the army, is only judged by how many yards it has advanced near Bakhmut. No one knows how many people have lost their lives in the process. Army generals must put on a show to appease the families of dead soldiers who will inevitably ask questions. However, convicts are not so lucky. 80% of Russian convicts do not receive letters from the outside, according to Olga Romanova, head of the NGO Russia Behind Bars. Unlike soldiers, there is no need to hide disasters involving convicts because they are voiceless and alone. By using convicts as disposable pawns, the military can control what information is revealed. Even the convicts' own family members, who they may not have seen in years, don't take notice when they die. The deaths of these criminals are not newsworthy, and no one cares if there's another incident like the Makiivka disaster involving them. To a corrupt bureaucracy, Prigozhin's scheme is a gold mine. He has added an expense to the budget that can justify anything, and it can't be traced, calculated, or inspected. It's like a mobile game where the objective is to gather as many coins as possible before time runs out. And using convicts as cannon fodder is like a bonus round where the coins never stop coming. The government can't let a businessman like Prigozhin profit from this opportunity. They need to take it for themselves. Why would they share the spoils with an ex-convict Prigozhin when they could hoard it all for themselves? However, using convicts as soldiers has an unintended consequence of corrupting and destroying the army. Prigozhin's strategy was to use criminals to fight for him. But even these violent criminals were kept in check by the fear of death if they disobeyed. Despite this, the army was still experiencing large numbers of desertions. Convicts make excellent cannon fodder, but they did not make effective soldiers. The idea of recruiting criminals to form a Night's Watch like in Game of Thrones is flawed, as it would create a gang of criminals who would do more harm than good. It would be more expensive to guard these criminals than to have a regular army in their place. Who would oversee these seasoned criminals, who are armed and dangerous? Would inexperienced commanders be put in charge of them? The influx of convicts into any military division would cause the loss of discipline, subordination, and control. The use of convicts as soldiers is not scalable, and convicts cannot be turned into mobilization sources for the army. Despite this, the top brass doesn't seem to care about the survivability of the army. They view criminals as another resource to be expropriated, with Prigozhin as the new Khodorkovsky, an oligarch they want to rob. They are only interested in selling people and making money, and the army's survival is of no concern to them. The bureaucracy values money, control, and influence, and Prigozhin's access to a valuable resource makes him a target for expropriation. However, this approach is short-sighted and unsustainable, as it consumes itself in battles for resources. Prigozhin may have stumbled upon a valuable resource, but he is now expendable, and his loss of access to free people renders him useless. This war has already claimed many important people, and Prigozhin's fate may be no different. In the last few weeks, the conflict between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense has intensified greatly. Recordings have begun to leak online in which the head of the Wagner PMC directly accuses Shoigu and Gerasimov of blocking ammunition for Wagner. He references photos of bodies, saying they are from just yesterday, and claims that there would have been 5 times fewer if they had been given ammunition. Additionally, Evgeny Prigozhin was very disappointed that he was not invited to Putin's announcement. Recently, Peskov reported that participants in a special military operation would be present at the event, but apparently Prigozhin was not considered one of them. In turn, Wagner PMC fighters recorded a video in which they shot portraits of high-ranking Russian generals with a machine gun. Such behavior is a spit in the face of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and it certainly will not lead to the improvement of relations between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense. Most likely, the amount of ammunition for the Wagner Group will be reduced even more, and we will continue to watch the rats eat each other. This is all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. We'll be back with more updates and information. Thanks for watching.